hopefully this is actually timed well. How many people were inspired by this morning's talks? How many people got some good ideas that they want to implement? How many people have no idea exactly when they're going to implement them? Okay, thank you for being honest. Cool, so we're actually, hopefully today is actually going to allow us to really wrap and tie in a whole bunch of stuff that we've done this week. This is going to be very workshop oriented again. I am not going to wax poetic about fundraising unless you buy me a beer, and then I'll gladly do that. On Monday, these were some of the things that you guys talked about as being common goals. So these were the things that we captured. So strategic partnerships, which included peer, corporate, or government, mentor networks, acceleration programs, or more programming, or different programming, educating policymakers, co-living, community building. And then, so I kind of lumped that all under go-to-market, and then on the right-hand side was some of the internal things, like how we make ourselves sustainable, metrics and measurements, and infrastructure. So the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because I actually have a question. My question is, how many manhole covers are there in New York City? Sorry? How many manhole covers are there in New York City?
A lot.
A lot. You guys are like, why the hell is Keith asking me this question? Right? And so this is actually what we're going to go through this afternoon. Though we're not going to answer the specific question, how many manhole covers are there in New York City, but it's a perfect example of the kind of question that entrepreneurs face every day. And so it's important to note, if you were to get an interview with McKinsey or JP Morgan, is JP Morgan bankrupt? Is that one of the ones that went south? I can't remember. If you got an interview with an investment bank, there you go. Nice. If you had a job interview with an investment bank or management consulting firm, that's the type of question they will ask you. They will say to you, how many manhole covers are there in New York City? Now, most of us need to then resist the urge, what a stupid question. We don't actually say that when we're in the interview, right? So you would say, oh, Keith, that's a really interesting question. Here's how I would go about getting the answer to that question. So in other words, there's a question, how many manhole covers are there in New York City? And there's an answer, potentially 1,800, right? The challenge is how the hell do you get to the answer, right? So that's actually the foundation question for all entrepreneurs. How do I? Right? So how do I go to market? How do I launch my product? How do I get funding? How do I expand into another market? How do I find a co-founder? How do I pay somebody when I don't have any cash? How do I? It is the single most common question that all entrepreneurs face. The next two, in case you're curious, what if and now what, right? So today, we're actually going to do an exercise on how do I. And so you guys, through this week, you identified a set of goals. So educating policymakers, how do we do that? Exactly. You guys are all thinking to yourself, how do I do that? I know I need to do it, and I can visualize the outcome, but how do I get there? So that's actually what we're going to spend our time on today, is getting into the habit of answering the how do I. Now, what I will tell you is, you guys can capture this today as an idea, as a concept of like, how do I, answering how do I all the time, how do I, right? Then you can teach that to your entrepreneurs, and I guarantee your entrepreneurs will become the best. Because if you can teach them the technique of answering how do I every single day, they will win every time. Okay? Make sense? Cool. All right. So, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of context for how we do things at Spring, just as a bit of inspiration before we workshop. So when we run our programs, which includes incubation and acceleration and our funding programs, there's a set of data that we collect that helps us to make better decisions and how we measure success. So for example, we collect demographic data, we collect sector of idea and stage, number of co-founders, who referred them, which is critical. We can chat about that a bit. And then early activity with Spring. So I don't know if you guys remember earlier on in the week, I think it was on Monday, I said that on average, people will attend 3 Spring events before they apply for a program.
There was another event
The funding workshop.
The funding workshop, exactly.
Negotiation, one.
So good question. Getting to a close, negotiation and getting to a close, you're absolutely right. So the important part here is if I wasn't collecting that data, then I wouldn't be able to see the pattern in the data, and if I can't see the pattern, I can't then set metrics, right? So, so to give you guys some context for us, average age of an applicant is 28 years old. We have an almost 50-50 male-female split. They tend to be in a committed relationship, no kids, no house, university or college educated. So that's our people. So when we start to look at applicants, that's a way that we can start to track some of the data. And when we start to look at people, we, interestingly enough, in our model, we have not seen a discernible difference in company performance based on the number of co-founders. So we have had as many successful companies be solo founders as teams, and we've had as many failures as well, right? So just to give you guys some context, that's our context. So these are some of the pieces that we gather early. And then on the workshops and events, revenue per event, obvious one, signups to attendees. So signups to attendees is actually a really important one for us because you'll have so many people sign up, but how many people actually show up? And so for example, in Vancouver right now, if we run a free event, we know that 65% of people will not come. Right? On average, there's about 7 startup events per night in Vancouver. People have a lot of choice. So what happens is they'll sign up for 3 or 4, and then at like 5 o'clock, they'll decide which one they're gonna go to. So if you wanna have 50 people in the room, you need to then scale up to that many signups in order to ensure that you're full. Does that make sense? Okay. Net Promoter Score. Does anybody not know what Net Promoter Score is? It's okay if you don't. Okay, so Net Promoter Score is now considered to be the universal best practice for understanding customer satisfaction. And there are a few expanded techniques that you can use, but at the end of the day, it's one question. On a scale of 1 to 10, what is the likelihood that you will refer someone to a future Keith workshop? And so here's the important part of that. Anything from 8.0 out of 10 and higher, you've done well. 7.9 and lower, you have a problem. So, because if somebody gives you anything less than an 8, they're not going to refer anybody. So just to give you some context, okay? So it's a really, really important metric to track. Number of workshops attended, as I said earlier, we track how many workshops people attend. So you remember I said earlier, if people come to 3 workshops, then chances are they'll sign up. We also know that if somebody comes to 6 workshops with signing up, they are an entrepreneurial tourist. So we just know they're just those people who will come to every workshop because I guess they don't have a social life otherwise, and that's fine, you know. But at the end of the day, there's always a core group of people who come to every workshop. We have one guy who, I'm not joking you, has probably been to about 65 workshops over 4 years with us. I don't know what he does. What was that? Right? Who does it, right?
They have also
guys who just like to socialize with people.
Are they a little quirky too? Quirky, like a little weird? Yeah, they're, you know.
They like to drink beer.
Yeah, they like to drink beer.
They have some connections to
Yeah. Yeah. As an interesting social exercise, if any of you guys have those people who are, you know, kind of entrepreneurial tourists, run a workshop and just charge. Magically, they all disappear. Isn't that funny? So number of alumni per workshop. So this one is really, really important for all of us. If you run an event or a workshop, you have to go out of your way to try and get one of your alumni into the class. Right? Because if somebody's been through your incubator program or your accelerator program or growth stage program or funding program, and then this is the workshop, right? And I say, Arland, hey, great to see you again. He's one of our alumni, you know, or even better, if you have multiple, then as you're introducing people, you're like, this is what we do, and blah, 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 blah. By the way, a show of hands, who's been in our programs? 3 or 4 people raise their hand, and everybody else in the room is like, oh, I wonder what I'm missing. It's a fantastic lead generation tool. And then the number of people who converted to leads, obviously. right? Because we don't want to waste our time. We need to be time efficient about how we go about this. So that's how we do it. Make sense? Okay, good. Did I go the wrong way? I did. There we go. Under co-working, it depends on the co-working model that you run, but number of members, number of events that you're running, so then the event-specific metrics that we talked about earlier, the number of bookings, so that's in particular room bookings, right? So, if you have meeting rooms, are they reserved? How often are they reserved? And then the number of corporate partners. So I'll give you an example. Actually, I can give you a couple of examples, but one of them that jumps out is Impact Hub in Manila. I think it's Impact Hub in Manila. An entire floor is taken by Adidas. So needless to say, as a corporate partner, Adidas is very important because not only are they resident there, but what they actually then do is they actually engage in the innovation ecosystem in the space. So they support through mentorship with the acceleration program that's running there, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Sweet.